You never know where our next guest will show up. He could be here, or even here. Wherever he is, you can't help but notice and feel his positive energy and attitude. As a global startup advocate for AWS, he's been all over the world sharing his passion for startups and helping them get started with AWS. If you're a startup and looking to find out more information around the programs, including AWS Activate, then stick around because we're talking with Mark Birch, Global Startup Advocate at AWS. Now, before I bring Mark onto the show, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify. All right, it's time to bring Mark onto the show. Please join me in welcoming Global Startup Advocate for AWS, Mark Birch. Mark, thanks for joining me, man.
Dude, it's awesome. So glad we could do this.
Again, first of all, we had a chance to officially meet in person in San Francisco. Then we did an improv thing at the DC Summit, and then you were at our book signing event this past Tuesday in New York. Dude, it's completely awesome to have you show up and collaborate with you on these. Nice. You too?
Imagine that.
Was yours signed?
I believe it is.
All right,
by
just
the
checking.
authors.
Yes.
And Mike.
I got that too. Okay, just checking. Nice.
It's going to be an heirloom.
It is, definitely. I love the book. So, Mark, I have seen you travel. First of all, I didn't even know you were I saw you hit the invite that you'll be there, but I was like, wait, you were supposed to be in San Francisco. Man, you're traveling all over the place. Let's talk about Mark and what Mark does at AWS as a global startup advocate and what that means.
Sure. It's a fairly unique role. There's only one of me here at AWS. We hope to have more, so it's not just global startup advocate, but essentially what a startup advocate is we're an organization within the developer relations group. And most of my colleagues in developer relations, they're all coders, software developers. They've been out there, they've done some pretty cool stuff. And they're out there helping developers to better understand how to get the most out of building on AWS. Now, I'm a unique bird in this because I focus not only just on startups, whereas my colleagues may talk to developers in big enterprises, to students, people that are hobbyists, whatever. I focus on startups and specifically startup founders, whether they're technical or non-technical, to help these founders understand and get the most out of the different programs and services that we offer that allow startups to build, grow, and scale faster on AWS.
Okay, the different types of programs that are available. That wasn't even one of the things I wanted to touch on, but I'm curious, what are some of the programs? Say I am a CEO, I wish maybe someday or whatever it is, of a startup. What are some of the programs that are available to me as a startup?
Well, for future startup CEO John Myer, you can first leverage AWS Activate. And this is a program we've had for quite some time that most people figure is just credits, which is important for your cloud costs. But it's also support, it's education, it's content that's relevant for the stage that you're at as a startup. There's partnerships and deals that allow you to use different services for a discounted rate. So there's a lot of things that are packed in there that can be really helpful at the early stages, such as if you have a question about, an architecture decision or which service to use, you can leverage AWS Activate and use the console to help guide you along the way, as well as to manage your costs as you're building out your MVP and as you launch it out there into the world.
Well, that's a lot of support for a startup or like a CEO thinking about, getting into that from AWS
Yes.
and that investment. Can I ask you, why? I mean, is it the whole, learn, growth, the IT, the skills, everything, or the relationship, or back to AWS's leadership principles, customer obsessed?
I think it always comes down to the attitude that we have from the very beginning, really just from the very beginning of Amazon, which is focus on the customer first and work backwards. And what that means is that we want to not just build stuff for the sake of building stuff. I think there's a lot of that happens out there. and it doesn't really lead to great results for customers or end users. And so our perspective was, we talk to customers first and we figure out, okay, from what they're saying or how they're behaving, what is really the core issue at hand and how best to solve that through technology and through taking a lot of that undifferentiated heavy lifting that often many founders are doing in the early stages and saying, let's help you take that off the table so you can focus most on what's important for you to be a successful startup, which is to build a business model which is repeatable and scalable. Now, startups, if we think about the criticality of startups in our growing global ecosystem and how much economic impact that has, it's the future. And you may say, well, wow, there's a lot of like really big companies like banks or energy or healthcare or what have you that employ lots and lots of people. But if you look at the past 10 years in particular, and you look at companies like Airbnb and Uber and so many other startups that have gone from just an idea to being multi-billion-dollar companies, they've changed industries and they've created massive amounts of innovation. And that is what we look at when we look at the entire impact of where the cloud is going. The cloud is still very, very nascent. Only 4% of the workloads globally are in the cloud. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the legacy or enterprise type companies or small to mid-sized businesses that are still kind of inching along into that journey for transforming. But startups, they're starting cloud native. And that really is the default architecture of the future for anything you build. And so investing in startups is our way of saying we're investing in the future. And if you think about that, what that investment looks like, we've already invested $2 billion of AWS credits over the past 2 years into startups.
Nice. That's a good number to throw out there, and the achievement that goes behind it. Not only just the credits, but everything else that comes behind the program of AWS Activate. Are there other programs available to me as like a CEO of a very small startup and a startup of one? Me right here.
Startup of one. It's a journey which does start at Activate, because you think about the expanse of startups that are around globally, right? We're talking about potentially 500,000 or more every year. And so it's hard to be as customer obsessed on a one-to-one basis. So leveraging Activate's really a way of us scaling the value that we can provide for as many startups as possible to get started. And we give them $1,000 credit as soon as they apply and get accepted as a Activate founder tier member. But as they grow and scale, there's going to be more services that can be applied. So a startup can get up to $100,000 USD in credits if they maybe join an accelerator program, if they work with some of our partners like Carta or Brex or Silicon Valley Bank, or to get institutional funding from VCs like a Sequoia or A16Z. So that's generally the journey for many of the startups that are in our Activate portfolio. But there's other things as well. For example, I just gave a talk at the AWS Startup Loft in San Francisco on the topic of founder-led sales, right? And it was a fascinating opportunity for founders to come in to a dedicated space just for startups that are in the Activate program to listen to that type of high-value programming, whether it's talks on go-to-market strategy, talks on particular services like Amplify, whether it's how to leverage AWS for things like cost optimizing your spend in the cloud, or architecting security. So there's a lot of different topics that we have and content throughout the loft. So that's something that's accessible to Activate founders in San Francisco and in New York, as well as our virtual loft platform that allows any Startup Activate member to access the virtual loft and virtual Ask an Expert bar. So you can ask questions to get some help around architecture questions you may have. So those are some of the beginning type of programs. But then, as a startup starts to build, grow, they're getting traction, they're getting funding, like things they're really hitting on all cylinders. Then there's things like the partner program or APN to become a partner. If you are an independent software vendor or providing like just a software service that could be valuable to other AWS customers, you can place that on the AWS marketplace. And then there's other types of services that are leveraged through our group, our AWS dedicated startups team, many of whom come from startups and have been startup founders, CTOs, operators. And there's programs like the Connections program that can allow us to connect promising startups to investors. So there's a bunch of different things that, as you're progressing in your journey as a startup, you can start to apply and leverage, because those programs are readily available to startups at a stage appropriate point in time.
Let's talk about the loss for a second.
Yep.
When I was at AWS, there was the New York and the San Francisco loft.
Yes.
I was actually at the New York loft. Recently, I was at the San Francisco loft for the opening
Yes, that's
of
right.
the San Francisco after 2 years as a startup one. But they weren't always a startup loft. They kind of switched over to that. Or what was the progression of the loft changing over either to startup and behind that?
It was actually always intended to be the
Was
startup
it?
law. Yeah, from the
Oh,
very
okay.
beginning.
I've never heard the term of a startup law. I just heard AWS or San
Yeah.
Francisco, the loft. And I was like, what do you mean the loft? I did a couple pictures in both locations, but I never heard it as a startup one.
Yeah, I mean, we may have like added startup lofts just to emphasize that over time. But
Or I
when the
just
lofts
dropped
were
it.
open, yeah, when the lofts opened, it was, I would say we've taken a little bit of a change of strategy, because before it used to just be open to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we recognize over time that we really want to make this valuable for AWS customers. Okay? And so people can come into Loft when it comes to things like programming. If we give a talk or there's an event, those things are free. But to be able to use the Loft for, say, co-working space or the Ask the Experts bar or some of the other types of programs that we have set up within the Loft, those are only available to Activate members.
So as a CEO for a startup, right? Say I want to
CEO
present.
John Myer.
Yeah. CEO John Myer, podcast CEO, right? I want to present at the loft. Can I present as an AWS Activate? I'm part of that program. How does that process work?
I think there's definitely avenues. It's not necessarily a direct way, because we're trying to find different ways of presenting program that's going to be compelling to other founders.
Yep.
So one of the things that we always talk about at AWS, and this goes back to our leadership principles, is have high standards, have the highest standards. And so that's something we call raising the bar internally, as you well know. And being a bar raiser, whether it's through hiring or public speaking, that's a very important part of our DNA. So whatever we do from an Amazon perspective, we always want to make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible. And so we think about that pretty much in terms of all the programming that you see. So that's why sometimes you feel like, wow, this feels like really like well produced, and the folks are very well rehearsed, and they understand their topics really well, because we don't let anyone just kind of get up on a stage and say, hey, let me just present stuff. We want to make sure that, one, the content is going to be above our bar. So it's going to be valuable content. It's going to be practical that you can use, whether it's technical content or business content. And that the person that is delivering the content is also at the highest bar of being able to be a person that can convey and present that information with high credibility.
I love how you use a lot of leadership principles and snuck in highest bar raiser, true Amazonian style. Love it.
I just had, it's funny because I just had a blog post in my newsletter, DevBizOps, which I've been doing for like 4 years now. But in that post, I talked about 2 years at Amazon, because a few weeks ago it was my second year at Amazon. And so I thought about like all these different things, like these phrases you hear it, when you're at AWS, like 2 pizza teams, or day one, or doc reads, right? Like the whole like narrative culture that we have at AWS, and all these like different Amazonian things. Even what I said before about working backwards, right? Mm-hmm. There's even a book called Working Backwards, right?
I've got, by the way, It was written
Huh?
by one of Jeff Barr's former managers. It's a really good book.
Yeah. I have not read it yet. Well, like
Oh,
quite a
okay.
few.
I won't
Uh,
put it on your list.
I will. But I get through the AWS cookbook first. So there's like there's a priority, there's a queue there. So I'm
As
definitely
much
going to hit that.
flying as you do, though, you've got some time, I have to tell you, because the Wi-Fi can't work all the time on the plane.
Unfortunately, it works too well. So I'm like, oh, I'm working away, and then like after like 6-hour flight from New York to San Francisco, it's like, oh, we're landing.
Yeah.
But but it's funny. I just you start to pick up these terms and you rattle them off, and you don't give it a second thought. And
Mhm.
sometimes I catch myself, maybe saying like an Amazonian type thing to my wife
Mhm.
or my kids, and I'm like, wait, I got to roll that back. They have no idea. So I wrote a blog post called 2 years at Amazon, where I talk a lot about the kind of language, the culture, the whole thing around AWS and the things I kind of learned and distilled over time.
Well, I saw the article. I read it. Great article that you put together. Keep doing
Thanks.
it. Actually, I think it was the first time I seen one of your articles come up like 2 years. I'm like, only 2 years? Man, I swear you've been there longer. But in AWS
Who knows?
style, 2 years is like, if you equate the dog years, man, you're like 14 years in or something.
Hopefully not. I don't want to go like gray here.
Wait a second. What's wrong with
What?
gray hair, man?
I don't know. I don't know. Not
What?
mentioning names. Not mentioning names.
uh Mark, I gotta ask you, all your videos, everything you do, when I meet you in person, even when you're off camera, I swear you're always smiling, always full of energy, always happy. Like, I mean, seriously, like that. We were on the floor in the summits, talking. The moment you got off the elevator in New York, I wasn't expecting you because I was going down to help somebody out. You came off, I was like, Mark, and he's like, am I at the right floor? Like joking with me. It was, how are you always full of energy, man? You're just like me, by the way, but we'll go.
But if I really need to be just like John, I need to get like the orange swoosh kind of going on in the sideburns here. I don't know if I can really do it as effectively as you because I have the super dark hair. I know.
I have it
That's
in my
gold right there.
pocket from the event.
That's wild. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I think part of it is, I've been really fortunate in my career. And people say like, oh, it's like, how do you become like what you do? Like, you sound like you have such a great job. And I always caveat that by two things. One, it's definitely been a pretty long, twisty journey to get to this point in time in my career. And the second thing is that I am a spokesperson. I am the outward-facing person representing AWS startups, and that's a huge responsibility, right? So I'm always conscientious in terms of how I present and where I'm at, and it's always with that view in mind that when I'm out there in public and even like more private settings, I'm still that representative, and I still need to uphold all that we are as an organization. But this doesn't happen overnight. Like, it doesn't, I don't get from like A to B and it's like some warp drive or some like wormhole. It was a career that started with just having lots of different interests, and not only different interests, but being interested in people. And so I actually started my career, well, first as a trader on the floor of an exchange, quickly switched to software developer because I kind of saw like this whole thing about like yelling in a pit. Like, it sounds kind of cool and fascinating, but then I realized like you could be like honestly any idiot doing like this whole like the whole hand thing and buying and selling commodities, and it's a very easy industry as I was looking around to disrupt. And I'm looking at all these kids that are out in Silicon Valley creating just industries from scratch in code. And I'm thinking, wow, if they ever look at what we're doing, all what we're doing is buying and selling. It's just code.
Yep.
And that could be way better automated and through software. And eventually, like that's what happened in equities, in commodities, in a whole bunch of industries that we're seeing. You know, the digitization of these industries is happening at a faster and faster pace. And so I just said, I looked at that and I had this epiphany, like I need to be the person that's writing the software. And so I did a 180 career switch, got a job as a software engineer, a junior software developer, and worked my way up. Got thrown into a sales career by
Wait. I gotta jump in
accident.
here. What code were you writing? What language?
Oh, it was C, C++. So this was like a little bit old school, and a lot of SQL, because we were building high transaction systems for banks and telcos and manufacturers. And so these were highly transactional database applications. And eventually we also brought that to the web. So I was doing a lot of HTML, JavaScript, Perl. Yeah, it was some pretty antiquated tools. It wasn't like being like the cool kids doing Rust, right? So it was definitely some more lower level, old school development work, but it gave me a real appreciation of how things work. I got to understand like what are the fundamentals of making a database performant. I got to understand how do you network a bunch of Linux boxes together, right, to create a network. I had to learn all that from scratch, like how to build security routines, how to salt passwords, for example. Like I learned the fundamentals that I often think, as I look to a lot of folks that are coming into startups or developers, they don't necessarily have a lot of experience. They haven't built a lot of real world systems. And there's a lot of things behind the scenes that you can mess up. And technology's gotten just way more complex. Just because the things that we're trying to do are a lot more complex. When you start to think about this, we used to not have to think about scaling to millions or even billions, right?
Yeah.
If you think about the scale of Amazon in our retail operations. So we've had to think about a completely different way of computing. And now all the different layers on top of that and all the abstractions. And so I think today's developer, they're just inundated with all these responsibilities, all these things they have to learn. And this is why having platforms like AWS is so critical, because you're not going to be able to take care of all of the ins and outs like I had to when I got started, because it's just not possible. And that's why I always encourage startup founders, use the tools but don't build from scratch. Like, don't go ahead and build your own code pipelines. Use tools that AWS provides for managing your code pipeline. Don't build your own security. Use IAM, use GuardDuty, use these tools that will automate a lot of that for you. And oftentimes, a lot of times when I'm talking to startup founders, sometimes it's to try and walk them back to saying, oh, you know what? Maybe you should be using this particular service or that service, and not have to build all that stuff you're talking about from the ground up. Right?
Yeah. A quick question, Mark. I want to go back to you were a software developer, and from there, no, not that role specifically. Okay, because we won't react to that. No, just kidding. Where'd you go from there? How did you get to be a global startup advocate?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at a software developer, and typically, if you think of a software developer, they're not actually out there publicly speaking. They're not a face of a company. They're developing it. They're passing it off to the everybody else who is then promoting it. How'd you get to where you were? Because now you went from what you were doing to a 180 of software developer to now a 180 of back. Like it's not a full circle.
Oh, yeah.
Like how'd you get there?
Well, one of the things I was starting to do as a developer is I was going on site helping customers, and I really love that. To me, that's what was exciting, like not just write code, but to see the results, to interact with people, to understand what is it they're really trying to get to, what's the real problem. And I suppose some folks said, hey, this guy works well with customers.
You play well with others.
And yeah, well, look, I don't think that's Yeah, I think it's an interesting sentiment about how software developers are, but the reality is that software developers are much like any other field. There's people that are more reserved. There's people that are more out there.
Yep.
I know plenty of my friends that I've kind of worked my way up in terms of the ranks of software engineering that have also been musicians that have had bands that went on tour. I mean, I was a musician, for
Wait,
example. So
whoa. Wait a second. A musician. Wait, I don't mean to jump in there. What did you play? Wait. Oh man, I can't save this till later. A musician? What did you do?
so I so I was a guitarist and singer in heavy metal bands for many years.
Okay, we're coming back to this. Come back into how you got to
Okay.
be an advocate. We're
But
coming
in
back
any
to this.
case, so like developers, there's developers of all stripes. Some of them are really good at just being out there and talking about stuff and helping and teaching others what to do. And some of those people become these developer advocates that you see oftentimes in Twitter or speaking at events. And some folks that I was working with were like, "Hey, uh, all the salespeople quit in your office. Why don't you sell?" I'm like, "What?" So I just got thrown into the fire. I didn't know anything, and I wasn't really comfortable doing that. I joined a company called Siebel not too long afterwards as a technical sales engineer, which meant I was back in the technology, but I had customer interaction. But very quickly, again, they said, "You know what? You're really good with customers and you understand the financial services world. So we're going to send you out back to New York," because I moved to San Francisco. So they sent me back to New York and I was a sales rep and I did really well. Did that for quite a few years, all the way through Oracle, had management responsibilities. And then I became a tech founder. I just said, I'm done with big companies. Like I see all these big problems not being solved and I want to take a chance. So, back in 2007, I got together with some folks. We put together an HR analytics workforce solution. Went out there to market. Financial crash kind of came. We couldn't raise money to really keep ourselves going. And we had software, we had customers, but ultimately it just looked like it was going to be a real dogfight. So we shut that down, but I got the bug. I'm like, I love startups. Like I'm never leaving. And so I started investing. I started to mentor startups. I was an advisor for a bunch, some of whom did really well, like Datadog. And from there, I just became this person that would help startups, sometimes in a part-time capacity, sometimes in a full-time capacity. So I joined Stack Overflow and was with them for 3 years to start a business from the ground up, to sell Stack Overflow's Q&A platform as a service for companies to manage their own knowledge. And that became a phenomenally successful business. Now, how does that actually all equate to being this person, a startup advocate? Well, in order to do a lot of this stuff, well, one, you have to love being out there with people, and you have to have a heart to help. Like that's where things start in terms of your motivation. It's how am I creating more value in this world for others? And I've always had that other orientation. And yeah, it's not that I don't care about myself. I also do, but yeah, I've always felt that I can be of help to others. If I can be, let me do that. And so I think part of it's just like an internal motivation. The other part is having a little bit of that diverse experience, having been both on the tech side, the business side, having had the experience of being a founder and seeing the ups and downs, gives me a really unique perspective that helps me kind of have a lot more empathy and understanding when I'm speaking with founders about the things that they really need and the things that they're telling me that if I feel are problems or things that we're not addressing from the AWS side, I know how to take care of them and how to potentially set up a program or to fix something on our end to help our startup founders be more successful. So, it's a little bit like kind of a convoluted, there's not like a straight line in any of this. And I think people feel like maybe I need to specialize. And I'm of a very different mindset. I think there's definitely a need for people who specialize and like they're the database guru or they're the DevOps
Not a
guru
startup
or,
though. I
or, or
don't
they're
think you
or they're
need.
like the
Yeah.
biz dev gal. But
Yeah.
I ultimately feel like there's a there's a huge open area for people that can connect and see these different things in different fields, different industries, and that's where you see innovation. That's where you see a lot of the spark of getting people excited to be an influencer and to be as helpful as you can be because you have these diversity of experiences. And that's exactly what a startup advocate can bring to the table.
I don't think you need to specialize because I think as a startup advocate, and you mentioned it because if you specialize, now you're really centering upon something specific here. You can actually broaden your horizon to a lot of
Yeah.
options and you have more. You're not, I don't want to say narrow-minded, but you're not
Right.
narrowing on one service. You're looking at all of it. And then when you're like a startup, they're not going to be specific on one service. They're going to be testing and trying to do different things, and you're helping them and guiding them along the way. I do have to tell you that AWS has definitely chosen the right person for this role. I don't know how many people they went through with the interview or loop process. I would love to know those stats because
Thank you.
it's, and no BS, man, because of your personality, you're smiling, your passion for it, and definitely the whole aspect of raising the bar. I mean, I follow you on all the social stuff and the posts that you share and what you're doing out there and the messages that you're sending out are right. Keep it up, man.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Uh, it's a big responsibility, and it's global in nature. And so, from my vantage point, it's where are we being the most impactful when it comes to the work that we do for startups. And so, our focus, we were here in the U.S. and we went to a bunch of summits, and we kind of view that lens of what's going on here in the U.S. with startups and with Silicon Valley and New York and L.A., Austin, Boston, like all these places that are these startup centers. And that's amazing. And that will continue to go on for hopefully many, many years. But I'm also excited about what's happening in places like Nigeria or in Indonesia or in Colombia or in Poland. Like all these places that are these burgeoning startup communities where you have lots of folks that are learning the technology. There's a thirst for that education and for STEM careers, and looking at the cloud as an opportunity to break through and to not only to attain financial stability, but also to innovate, to change their environment, to bring an entirely new set of services and capabilities and programs to their countries. And so that's a huge area that from an AWS standpoint that we look at when we look at the ways that we invest, the ways that we engage. And that's why we've made the effort to set up such a wide expanse of regions and availability zones, like launching in Jakarta, which was like huge, just a huge announcement and a huge uplift for the Indonesian startup community and the Indonesia community at large, just opening up a lot more opportunities for startups to now have a region of their own to plug into, to keep their data there. They don't have to worry about data sovereignty issues, and to be able to build, grow, and scale their startups in their own region. And we're continuing to put that investment in. And so from my perspective, I look at what's going on globally, and it helps me get a real sense and a balance of what's really needed and where we can kind of best utilize our resources and where we can best spend our time to be impactful and to provide those opportunities. And there's like amazing programs that we're putting together, just from an education standpoint alone. This whole announcement about helping to train 29 million people on cloud computing skills by 2025. Huge initiative. Other initiatives like our Impact Accelerator that we just announced several weeks ago. And now we have our first cohort of Black founders here in the US. So that's 25 startups and their founders that are getting together for an 8-week program where they're going to get actual funding, like money in their
Nice.
hand for the startups. They're going to get $100,000 worth of AWS Activate credits, a whole bunch of
Huge
education,
accomplishment there. That's
mentoring.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're going to continue those cohorts with women, with Latinx, with LGBTQ, and we're going to continue that as a program. We're also doing accelerators in EMEA. So serving startup founders on a continuous monthly basis, where we have cohorts of, I think, upwards of 20 startups.
Wow.
Where we're, again, providing credits, providing technical support, mentorship. In fact, I do a bunch of mentorship sessions for that accelerator program in EMEA. I do some speaking things as well. So I did a talk on hiring and setting up your culture as a startup founder. And so it's just like all these programs we're doing on a global basis in different regions to have that impact. And that's the thing that gets me so passionate, is that I can see the results. Like, it's a lot of hard work. It's a ton of work. And I do have to say, I'm still smiling while I'm still sleep deprived. I got to fix that one. Like that's not a long-term strategy. The sleep deprivation point, that is. But what keeps me smiling is that, and that's why I joined AWS. I could have continued on at Stack Overflow. We were doing really well. I was actually thinking about leaving and starting on my own and doing my own startup again. But the opportunity to join AWS and have impact and to deliver results, like as I started to talk to people, like the initial hiring manager, I went through the loop and I spoke to other people I knew that were already within AWS. It was pretty apparent to me that it would be completely asinine to not take this opportunity.
I love that. That would be definitely a decision you regret. Something you'll look back on, and it was one of those decisions that you actually you said so 2 years, 2020, right? 1 year after, 1 year after me. Wow, congratulations on it. Now, you're a global startup advocate of one. You said that you're looking to hire more because this is definitely not sustainable for a global. Where are you looking now? And like, what's the first thing you're looking for in a person?
Well, we actually have an open headcount in EMEA, for the EMEA region, but the role, just for a whole host of reasons, has to be based in London.
Yep.
So hopefully anyone that's listening, if you are in London,
I will post about it. I will be marking it. Don't forget to take a look at the link in the description below for the job and role.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We actually did fill the role in the US. So we have someone that's in San Francisco, and she's been on the ground for at least like a month now, or a month and a half. So she's going to be awesome. And we're going to go from there. We're going to see what other regions we should have a region-specific person focused on. So that will be in the works.
Lighten your load a little bit. So that'll be good for you, so that you can focus and not have to travel. I mean, literally, you were just in New York, San Francisco. You're back in New York now, so
I'm back in San Francisco next week.
Oh, well, already then. So speaking of events, San Francisco next week, an event that's happening, or just customer stuff, or when's your next event?
Customer stuff.
Okay.
So people think that, as a spokesperson, I'm just the person that's the mouthpiece, and I talk on podcasts and
I get that too.
Blogs,
so don't worry.
I speak. I'm like the Jeff Barr of the startup world. But
hey, that's a good comparison, by the way. Take that with that's perfect.
That's a good idea.
You just seriously, you look at where he is and where you're at, and the visibility and what you're doing. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the visibility and the comparison, if somebody ever compared you to that, that's a compliment, 100%.
No, I look up to Jeff. To me, he's like the originator. He is like the OG of all things tech evangelism. So I've only just now gotten to know Jeff, and he just blows me away. Like the humility, the sense of how he presents himself to the world, which is completely genuine. Like there's no airs. There's no there's no other side.
Yep.
When you speak to Jeff, whether it's Jeff on social, Jeff in real life, Jeff with family, it's Jeff, and it's like super refreshing. So I take lots of notes from Jeff's playbook in terms of how he's successfully navigated being an evangelist. And for any folks listening, you had that great interview just recently with Jeff Bard I just watched, which was amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Great job. But just follow Jeff and what he does. And I think you'll get a real genuine sense of what it means to truly be in that evangelist shoes.
Yep. He's an awesome friend, mentor, everything. Just actually my title was inspired by him. So
that's true. Both chief evangelists.
Yeah. All right. So where are you going next? What's your summits and what's this next step? Where can we see Mark next advocating for startups and talking?
All right. So a lot of times there'll be specific events, right? Because, as a spokesperson, I'm supposed to be speaking to lots and lots of people. But there's also a lot of different types of engagements. Again, it always comes down to what's going to be most impactful. Mm-hmm. It's no good talking to 5,000 people if none of them care about they're not startup founders or don't care about cloud. So, it's where you're going to be impactful. So there's also times when I'm helping startups on a one-on-one basis. So I'm still mentoring. I advise startup founders because some come up to me and, if I can't really help them, I'm very upfront. But there's some that I say, okay, well, I do have some expertise. I may be able to, give you some guidance or, throw out some questions that kind of help you through your thinking. So there are startups I do help. And so when I'm going to go out to San Francisco, I was going to meet up with some of those startups and founders, one of whom will be coming from Singapore, as a matter of fact. And we're going to be doing an event together. So that'll be fun.
Nice.
And then I'm going to be out in LA to meet up with some, again, a lot more one-on-one meetings with investors, with startup founders. So going to be out down there in LA, then back to New York, and then we'll see. I've left the summer a bit open, but we'll definitely be getting together, John, in New York City.
Yes, we will. No, well, and obviously you're in New York. I'm about an hour and a half away. I will be there bright and early. There has got to be, 12,000 plus people. It's going to be huge. It's going to be packed. It's going to be great, impactful. I'm looking to make a good presence and talk to so many people, not only on using like NOps, but also just, evangelizing products and talking to people on why they're out there and kind of doing some improv podcasts. Cause me, I got to just wing it as we go.
No, I love it. I love the spontaneity. I think it works really well. I think capturing folks in the moment, not trying to be overproduced or processed, but just keep it genuine and just keep the content flowing. So keep doing what you're doing. That's awesome.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. Mark, before we close things out, do you have anything you want to leave with the audience? Anything that's on the top of your mind or passion, maybe a few inspiring words to startups and CEOs like the John Myer podcast?
Yeah, CEO John Myer podcast, or the would-be CEOs of any startups out there. A few things come to mind. One is being an entrepreneur can feel really lonely. I've been there, but there are people that can help. And that's one of the things that's been a real bright spot from my time at AWS. Is my colleagues on the AWS startups team are truly brilliant, but also incredibly dedicated to helping startups. So we are an organization which is here to help. We're not this faceless, massive organization. We definitely have taken the approach in startups org to be on the ground, to doing what we can to help customers. So that's first and foremost. So anyone that's out there, kind of think about, where they're going to build, what provider. I think that's an important consideration. The technology is critical, but also the partner you work with, that's going to be the infrastructure that your startup is building on. The more on the personal note, it's I do a whole host of interviews with startup founders, investors, startup operators called the AWS Startup Show. And I run these on an app called Clubhouse. Some people are like, oh, is Clubhouse still a thing? We've actually made it a thing. And we've had 250 of these shows that we've run since last year in March. So we've had 250 we've actually had more guests because sometimes we've had panels, but we've had like so much great content, everything from, just cloud technologies to biotech, the fintech. We've had underrepresented founders. We've talked about banking and underserved communities. So we've run the gamut of topics. And so the AWS Startup Show is a really great place. If you're looking for inspiration, for practical tips on things that help entrepreneurs to be successful. Definitely a lot of lessons learned there. So check it out, the AWS Startup Show on Clubhouse, AWS Startups Club there. And you'll see all the past episodes. Or if you just follow me on Clubhouse, you'll see it all. And then lastly, I talk oftentimes about community and community building. And it's a core aspect of what I do as a startup advocate. So if anyone has questions about how to build, grow, and scale a community, I'd be happy to talk about that as well. In fact, hopefully you don't mind, but I do have a book on this topic.
Go for it, man. Ooh.
Oh,
Community. Go up a little. Go up a little bit. I'm gonna see community in a box. Ooh, all right. You know what? I'm gonna do. So what I'll do is I'll drop a link in the description below for the book, the Clubhouse. By the way, I almost forgot about the Clubhouse. Thanks for throwing that in, man. That's actually pretty good. Also, Mark's LinkedIn profile. You got the Twitter, everything, man. He's one you have to follow on social. He's got a lot of great information. He doesn't post just anything. He does pick and choose and make sure that it is valuable to you reading it because he knows your time in scrolling is valuable.
Yes.
Nice. Absolutely. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, this is a pleasure. I knew as soon as we connected back out there in San Francisco, like, dude, this is awesome. We are simpatico and looking forward to many, many opportunities to chat, meet, and do things like this.
You can guarantee we're doing something in New York. So in 1 month, we've got something going. I got some new gear to test out too, by the way. So we're going to, yeah. I was going to bring it on, but I won't. But no, seriously, Mark, thanks for connecting. Thanks for allowing me to do that spontaneous video of the San Francisco law startup. I literally I messaged him one morning. I was like, I got this crazy idea for your startup thing. What do you think? And Mark's like, let's do it. And I threw it together. I had it uploading in the Uber onto the airport and had it posted before I got to the plane.
That was wild. I'm like, wait, I thought, okay, it's going to be a few days. And I'm like, no, it's like right there. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Time is of the essence for everything. And I try to make things quick as easy and do that. So Mark, thank you so much for joining. There's a lot more we got to do, a lot more of these events, either in person, social, more lofts, whatever it is. I enjoy these conversations with you.
No, 100%. Love it.
All right, everybody. Mark Birch, Global Startup Advocate for AWS. My name's John Myer, your host. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because guess what? We're out of here.